Good afternoon and welcome. Good afternoon and welcome to DPLA's afternoon webinar on analytics. Thank you for joining us. Good afternoon and thank you for joining this webinar. We'll get started shortly.
You should be good to start.
Okay, good afternoon and welcome to this member webinar. Thank you for joining us. This webinar is intended for representatives of DPLA member hubs, and it's presented by the DPLA Assessment Working Group. Members of the working group will present the results of the Assessment Working Group's 2019 survey of hub and sub-hub managers that gauge the impact and usefulness of DPLA assessment tools. DPLA is committed to understanding the needs of our network members and our users and improving through assessment. The Assessment Working Group is charged with strengthening the network's capacity to demonstrate the value of DPLA and the Hub's network by advancing both the assessment of our services, collections, tools, and programs, and the understanding of those metrics network-wide. The Assessment Working Group implements projects that help develop and communicate a better understanding of our students, researchers, and the general public. They work with DPLA staff on prioritizing, planning, and implementing assessment and SEO activities, and they share assessment information more broadly across the network while identifying and responding to opportunities for working at a national scale on issues of assessment and impact. This afternoon's webinar is led by Kelly Rowan of the Sunshine State Digital Network, who serves as the chair of the Assessment Working Group, Jason Roy of the Minnesota Digital Library, Tara Carlisle of the OK Hub, and Babby Hammond of the Plains to Peaks Collective. Also joining us this afternoon is Audrey Altman, developer at DPLA. Before we begin, some Zoom housekeeping. We ask that you ask your question in the Q&A box in the toolbar at the bottom of the Zoom window. Speakers will monitor the chat and answer questions as the webinar proceeds, and we'll take additional questions at the end. And now on to our webinar.
All right. That's going to be me, Kelly Rowan. As Shanae said, I am currently the chair of this assessment working group for DPLA. And Shanae's covered kind of everything we're going to go over. And I'm going to start with the Hub Analytics report we did. So some of you may have filled out the survey. You would have got it, I think, last year, probably winter, spring-ish. I think we finished up the report in spring. I'm thinking April. So there were 21 questions overall. We got a 38% response rate, which according to surveys is great, but you always hope for more. And the broad topics, in case you didn't get the survey and you didn't fill it out, it covered three main areas. So whether or not hubs were conducting assessments, and if so, how, and what kind of data, are they collecting data, what kind of data, and if so, why are you collecting data? I mean, there's obvious reasons, but we wanted to know like why you specifically are collecting it. What assessment tools was another category. Are you using? Which ones do you find most useful? And like, what do you wish we could be collecting? And finally, kind of a broad group of questions dealt with the impacts that member hubs have seen from their participation in DPLA. So let's dive right in. I'm not going to go through all 21 questions. That would be tedious. So it's just an overview of the report. So why hubs collected data, and I don't feel there were any surprises here. The most common one was to prove return on investment. And the other two most popular were to improve digital collection services and to demonstrate impact. of collection on scholarship and research. And then to a lesser degree, to comply with reporting requirements, which probably also kind of falls into return on investment somewhat, to improve collection selection decisions and to demonstrate the impact of collections on the broader community. So like I said, I don't feel that there's any real surprise in here as to why we would expect people to be collecting data. And then we had how hubs are collecting their data. So by far the most popular was the anecdotal information collection, which we found interesting. User surveys, very common, came in next. Some of the ones I wouldn't have thought maybe people were doing were user interviews. So there's some interesting collection of data going on here. All right, so let's take a look at assessment tools and abilities. And so this was sort of a wish list of what people, we have the Google and the Analytics Dashboard, right? And so people did report that a few people said that had everything they needed. Some people said they had never accessed it yet, so they couldn't really report on it. And I realized like people do turn over in the hub. So some of you may be completely new to the Analytics Dashboard. That's fine, that's great. Audrey, after me, Audrey is gonna give you a little demo of it. So if you need to learn more about it, and if you already know about it, she can let you know if there's any updates. So some of the things people would like to see, more ability to share statistics across different hubs, probably for comparison purposes, I would say. People overall said they would like to be able to run the reports themselves and have more information about the click-throughs. So this is stuff that we've looked at and where we can make changes. I'm sure Audrey has, she'll be updating you on that, like I said. So other things that were important: regular reporting on engagement, an ability to track trends. I know I'm reading it backwards, sorry. And being able to see if curating resources has an effect on usage. So these are all good things for us to think about and try to build on. So impact. 54% of respondents said they saw some minimal growth. 36% saw no growth. Of course, I think we had a small percentage of people who hadn't even accessed the dashboard. So there would be no way to see any growth if you had it probably as related to DPLA. So this is something we're definitely working on, and I think awareness also, and I'll talk a little more about that in the next slide. Awareness is going to be one of the main factors to getting more growth going. And I don't know, I would be interested to hear from anybody else. I'm working at FIU, and one thing we have seen since the pandemic is a decrease in usage of digital collections for whatever reason. I'm assuming it's just kind of a feeling of like I'm just over the computer because we're all on the computer all the time. So, but I would love to hear, when we get to questions and answers, if anyone else is seeing that same trend. All right, so assessing the value of participation. People are largely doing that through usage statistics and tracking primary source sets and exhibits as a way to justify the time spent on creating them. They are very time consuming to do sometimes. But there's other ways people were judging metrics of success as far as their participation with DPLA. Things like adding more partners, of course, the addition of collections, we expect that, but also just growth in their seeing the partner skills grow. And we'll be talking a little bit about, I think Jason's going to talk to you about like metadata completeness, which would be a skill, that could help with success, and more awareness and more usage. So, and even participation in our DPLA committees was seen by some as a way to gauge success in participation with DPLA. So our impact wish list from our hubs was increased visibility, And this is one of those things, and improve the awareness of collections. And I think this is not just a DPLA issue by any means. And so just to share a quick story with you, I had 3 PhD interns working with me. Not one of them knew about our digital collections until they started working with me, and they were PhD students. So this was disappointing, and they were very disappointed because they wished they had known about these resources earlier. And one of my interns went on to get a full-time faculty job in a couple counties over, and he really wanted to keep using some FIU resources because the resources at the new university were not his specialty. But then he felt kind of weird being a new professor and still using his graduate school's resources. So I said, well, why don't you go to DPLA and just find them there if you feel weird about it? And he was like, what is that? So again, this is a problem for all digital collections, is finding that awareness. And these were PhD students, so it's just heartbreaking. All right, so other impact wish list items. Build political support for strong library funding. That is the dream for all of us. Obviously increased access and providing a common good, which we're already doing, I feel. So I feel that's already there. All right, so that's really all I'm gonna cover. I didn't wanna be too tedious. The report went out, so keep it kind of brief for you. But keep in mind, throw some stuff in the chat, because I definitely had some questions and I'd love to hear from you guys. So I'm gonna let Audrey take it over, and she's gonna give you a demo of the analytics dashboard now.
Thank you. And I am going to do screen share. So Kelly, would you mind stopping your screen share real quick so I can switch? Thanks. All right, here we go. Can everyone see that?
I can.
All right, I'm going to take that as a yes. All right, so this is the DPLA Analytics Dashboard. A little background, we have provided usage data for the website through Google Analytics for many years, but we wanted to provide something that was a little bit more custom to what people tended to need, what the hubs tended to need, because the Google Analytics dashboard can be a little bit overwhelming, and if you don't know all of the nitty-gritty details about how we track certain kinds of use, it's hard for people to just sort of go in and become acclimated to it. So I think, though, that all of the hubs still have access, if they want it, to the Google Analytics dashboard. So if anyone is doing an in-depth analytics project and wants to see the data from that perspective, that's fine. You probably already have permission to do so. You just have the ruby slippers and don't know it. So anyway, so this dashboard is it's an improvement, not only because it sort of pulls out what we think are the key data points and presents them, but it's also a combination of data from several different sources. So all of our usage data is collected through Google Analytics, but this has website use from website use is the dp.la website, and we also have the API use, so non-DPLA use, meaning like use from external sources, external researchers or external projects, pulling data from the API that is tracked and presented here as well. And we also have some metadata quality information that we wanted to present alongside the usage information. So if you see changes in your usage, or if you have ambitions to get more usage, the metadata completeness is a good place to start to think about data quality. And you can start to see maybe the relationship between different kinds of usage and different types of metadata quality. So I'm picking on Minnesota today and showing your data to the world. So I hope that no one from Minnesota has a problem with that. They know how to find me if they do. But anyway, Minnesota has great data, so I'm sure that it's only an honor to be being shown off at the moment. So anyway, this is when you log in. Oh, and I should say, if you don't have an account yet, The hub contact at every hub, the DPLA hub contact, should have admin privileges and should be able to set you up with an account. So if you want an account, talk to them and they can set you up with that. And if they have questions, they can talk to me and I can help set them up too. But anyway, so when you log in, this is sort of your main splash page. And some of the features here, you can see there's, data in the middle of the page. Up here in the upper right-hand section, you can set a date range. So I have this set for May to the end of August, so we can get sort of a summer quarter view of what's been happening. But you can change the date ranges, and it goes back as far as we have been collecting this kind of data, the specific kind of event data that lets us do this really specific reporting for what's happening with your own hub and your own contributors. So if you need data that goes back further than that, then you can ask us and we can try and get it for you through the analytics dashboard. But anyway, so the website use is the dp.la website, and you can see if you hover over things on this dashboard, you get little explanations that pop up for what everything means, which is nice. So this is going to tell you how many views you're getting, so people looking at your items in the context of the digital library catalog, and then exhibitions primary source sets, which are curated collections of data. The click-throughs, that's everybody's favorite number. It's when somebody clicks on an item from the DPLA and gets directed to your website. And I encourage you, if you have seen anything anomalous with the referral traffic coming to your own analytics dashboard, to check this click-through numbers. This is a more reliable way that we're tracking traffic from our website to your website. So if you see anything weird going on with click-throughs, referrals on your end, then this is a way that you can double check that data to make sure it's correct. And then we have users and sessions. These are, users and sessions as defined by Google Analytics Dashboard. One of the reasons that we use Google Analytics as our software for tracking use is because most of our network also uses Google Analytics to track their use. So that makes it a little bit less of a challenge for people to take up using our system because they are presumably used to the sorts of metrics already. And then API use is use of, like I said, researchers or applications that access the data directly through the DPLA API, as opposed to getting it from the dp.la website. So you can see how many clicks you're getting and how many different registered apps or users you have. We don't have a lot of information about who these users are and what they're using the data for because of the privacy restrictions. The people who use our API enjoy a very strong level of privacy, which is great ideologically from a library standpoint, but can be a little bit frustrating for us because sometimes we would really like to know who's using our data and we just don't, because we've decided that we would like to put other people's privacy ahead of our ability to track information about them. Item count is good for context. This is the total number of items that you have indexed in the DPLA. And then Wikimedia integration, this is a new one. Almost everybody's at 0% right now because this is a new initiative. But Wikimedia readiness is about how many of your items are ready right now today to get sucked up into the Wikimedia project. If you have more questions about that, you should talk to Dominic. He's our Wikimedia guy. Yeah, so that has to do with having the correct sort of rate statements and full frame images ready for us to use. And then metadata completeness here is what percentage of all of your records have any value for these different things, these different fields. These are the fields that are used by our search engine and by other search engines like Google search engine in order to do the search and discovery piece of the system. So if you have values in these fields, then there's just more for the search engines to work with and higher likelihood that your items are going to be found in the huge soup of 30 million items that we have going right now. All right, so that's just sort of a brief overview of the kind of stats you can find here. If you go down the left-hand panel, there's some visualizations that you can access. And I apologize for, sometimes you have to refresh the page on these visual components. And it's just because of the big delay time in fetching and rendering the data. So that was a real-time demo of having to refresh this page. But yeah, so you can see here's the item views and how it changes over time. This is pretty typical for us that we get a dip in the summertime and then use goes back up as the school year starts. So we can see that sort of playing out here at the item views. Click-throughs is not as much yet, but look at, oh, the users are really coming up. So anyway, this is kind of fun to look and see change over time and how things are going. There's another timeline for the API. You can look at the user locations, which will show you a map of where everybody is who's using your site. This one takes the longest to load. It might not be loading for me because I have video software running, but if you, oh, there it is, good. So you can see where in the United States and where in the world people are using your stuff, which is kind of nice. And then once you get down to like these views, you can start to see, dig into the individual items that are being used, either in the library catalog and exhibitions, et cetera, et cetera. So this can help you to sort of identify your hard-hitting players, your items that are really doing a lot of work for you getting traffic. And then at the end is Wikimedia readiness, which I mentioned, and that has to do with having the right full frame media and the right standardized rights statements that make you Wikimedia compatible. So again, talk to Dominic if you have questions about that. Okay, so another thing you can do that's pretty cool is that you can look at a breakdown for all of your contributors. So this is like ginormous spreadsheet view that down here, this column, you can see all the different contributors for your institution, and then these are all of the different data points that we collect. So you can sort of click up here and decide which things you're interested in looking at and see a breakdown for how your different contributors are doing in comparison with each other. And you can always download, there's several, I didn't show you them on every page. On most pages, there's an option for you to download if there's a lot of data on a page so that you can download it as a CSV and do your own analysis on it. And then finally, you can click on any one of your contributors and you get all of the data for your contributor. So you can, you know, see how they're performing, how their metadata is, and all of the different views that you had for your hub, you can get for each of your contributors. And you can feel free, if you want to, share this information with your contributors. Some people have decided that they want to do this and make accounts for all of their contributors or their contributors who are interested, and then they can go in and look at their own data. So you can feel free to make accounts for whomever you like and to manage that however you want. All right, one more piece of data that you have to look at is the search terms. So this looks at the terms that people are using in the DPLA website and then in the API to find materials. And this is so that, you know, it might help you with collection development if you want to see what sorts of queries people are doing on the DPLA. You can see here some of the top things that people are looking for. And this is for all of the DPLA because when people are, you know, in our interface, they're usually not searching within a single hub or a single contributor, they're searching throughout the entire collection. So this is for all of DPLA. This is the only thing on here that doesn't apply just to your hub or contributor. These are just the terms that our users are using. And then finally, there is this users management system. So if you have admin privileges on the system, then you have the ability, if you go to this users tab, you can create new users, you can edit permissions for users, sign them up, delete them, etc. And that is it. So, oh, and I just wanted to show you, I think I mentioned the summer dip, and we already mentioned the effects of COVID. But just to give you sort of a sense, if you look on, this is, you know, this is all of the page views for the entire DPLA website since 2014 until the present. And I just wanted to show you this because I think the trends over time is really interesting. You can see that, you know, our use has been growing since 2014 and continues to grow, which is good. But we get these really dramatic swings in use, and this is correlated to the school year. So we get really big dips in the summer. We always get a dip in December, and then fall is our biggest time. So we are here now in September, and you can see we're just starting to tick up again for the school year being back in session, which is normal for us. But I think it can be a little bit of a shock for people when they start looking at their data for the first time, especially if you start, you know, around here and suddenly your data is all dropping off. Oh no! But it's just because it's the school year, and we don't really know yet whether or not COVID is going to have an effect on our data, our usage data. You know, we have what looks like a big bump right here in April, but that was, we tracked that down. That was because CNN did an article about digital libraries and linked to us. So we got a really big traffic day in April, which was great. But that doesn't mean that we necessarily had a COVID bump. It was just a single article. So it's kind of early to say yet whether or not we're going to see more or less traffic because of the pandemic, but it will be definitely interesting to keep track of and to hear what you all see in your institutions as well. All right, so I think I'm going to stop there, and I will stop screen share and give it back to, I don't even know who's next. Jason, are you next?
I am
Jason.
next. Ellie, would you share the screen again for me? Perfect. So this is fantastic. Thank you so much, Audrey, for sharing all this. I guess what I'm getting at now is why this stuff matters and how we can leverage the sort of the DPLA dashboard to drive our own collections to be better, to do better. And we think about how these collections work in terms of driving discovery, use, and reuse, as I like to talk about it. And looking first at metadata completeness, what that tells us about our own metadata. Are we effectively exposing our collections through the metadata search engines that Audrey spoke about, and how we take a look and begin to dig down to find out where we are succeeding, where we are failing, and where we are, you know, just trying our best. And all of this is falling back on our own data entry guidelines. Are we managing our own data entry guidelines properly? Are we enforcing our rules of participation in our service hubs to ensure maximum exposure to these collections in DPLA, so that we're not grumbling and saying, why isn't our stuff being found, but instead taking a look and saying, oh, our metadata completeness may not be optimal to be found. And we begin to think about, next slide please, Kelly. We begin to think about how we drill down and find out, where are we doing well? Man, MDL really does well with title completeness, and that is because it's a required field for our guidelines. Next slide, Kelly. And then there's also other areas in which we're doing kind of good, or perhaps some of our partners are doing better than others. So how do we work with our partners to bring their metadata up so that it can play well in this sort of national aggregation? You know, this tool provides us an opportunity to find out where we're doing great, where we're doing fine, and where we're in need of a little extra effort, opportunity to do better, as it were. But I do want to stress, like any good metadata librarian that I'm not, that this data doesn't tell us that it's good. It just tells us that there's data there. And so there's some interesting things in which how our taxonomies, how our subject headings, how our terms are used both locally, nationally. Are we integrated across that so we're doing well? So that's kind of an opportunity where we might be able to, as we push forward, see how our terms are being used, not just within MDL, but with MDL as it plays out with all the other service hubs across the country. Next slide, please. The second opportunity is to think about the dashboard is the search terms. And as Audrey pointed out, these are search terms coming in from not just our hub, but from DPLA at large. And to think about, this is the national search term base. These are the terms being used nationally. And then over on the other side of the screen, I have a screenshot from our own Google Analytics that is really just hitting against our Minnesota Reflections MDL interface and the terms that are being used. And we begin to think about sort of this local and regional knowledge that may not exist at a national level, and how do we make sure that we are providing accurate metadata that enables those national searches to be found against our localized records. If you think about the Sisters of St. Joseph, might not be a popular term nationally, but certainly regionally and within the state of Minnesota shows up as number 2 on our list. Next, please. So falling back on our search terms gives us also an opportunity to do some collection development assessment. And the Minnesota Digital Library has done 2 of these collection and use analysis that really is getting at how our collections are being used, where our collections are most, have the most depth in terms of scope and content, and where they also are lacking in depth. So it's finding, if you will, the next slide, please. It's finding both the positive, the types and formats represented, the growth of the collections by institutions and by regions. We have the state of Minnesota broken down into several regions. So we're looking at, are we being equitable across our geographic span? What are the most viewed, most searched, most popular collections? And that helps drive sort of collection development. But I do want to put a caveat on it by saying, what we're also wanting to find out is the minus sign. Where is the negative space in which our collections are not addressing sort of the story of Minnesota, where our formats are not representing the breadth of the formats available in these unique and rare collections in these cultural organizations across the state? Where might we have the opportunity to reach out and do a little deeper digging into figuring this all out? Next slide. So that's sort of what we're trying to do here with this analysis that Greta Bonneman, who is our metadata coordinator at the MDL, put together both in 2012 and 2018, taking these snapshots, as it were, to find out within our broad topical areas, where can we do better? Where can we not just sort of react to collections that may be posited for us for inclusion in Minnesota Reflections, but to actively go out and say, these are the areas we know that we're missing, we know that we're lacking, and we know we need to grow in order for the story of Minnesota to have a more fulfilling and sort of more holistic representation of our state. Next slide. So from this, we begin to think about use and reuse and how we leverage, you know, if that first part was about discovery, is how are people discovering us? What we want to say is, how are people using us and reusing? And that's really a combination of, like I said before, our own local Google Analytics and the DPLA dashboard that shows us both how are we doing statewide and regionally as drawing eyeballs and users to our site, Minnesota Reflections, and then how are we being aggregated and being amplified effectively through DPLA, and that's through the dashboard. So each of our institutions that participate with us in Minnesota Reflections receive monthly Google Analytics reports that talk about what their top collections are, what the stats are, all the stuff that the Google Analytics is drawing, very similar to what you're seeing over there in the DPLA Analytics Dashboard. And that's really talking about how people are using us. How DPLA is referring people back to us, how people are discovering us in DPLA versus our own. And that's sort of that, what I like to call it, sort of that passive reuse, that sort of I watch television, which is very different than I code sort of reuse. Next slide, please. So what I also want to push is this notion of how DPLA advances this idea that our data is there to be reused. You know, one of the singular factors of participating in DPLA to begin with was the need for us to CC0, that is to openly allow use and transformation of our metadata as it's being used in DPLA, and by extension as it's being used through the DPLA API. And for the University of Minnesota Libraries, we several years ago came up with an open sharing policy that we were, probably like many others, getting inundated with requests to use our data, to have copies of data. Can you have our data? And we sat back and we thought about it. We said, well, we want to openly share our data. We're not trying to put this behind a firewall. We have shared with DPLA. We have shared our data in many other places. We have exposed our data through APIs and through OAI. And that we want to get out ahead and say, we want you to reuse our data. That this isn't just about use. This isn't just about us telling you what we think you should see or how we should create a web page, but it's sort of about, here's the raw data. Come up and do something really interesting and something really new. And that's really helpful to see on the dashboard, is how DPLA is driving that sort of reuse. Next slide, please. So much so that even in our own Minnesota reflections, and this is a screen capture of it, what we see is that we are now actively trying to push out the data to our users. So any user to our site can have access to both the actual image as they see it, but also the JSON data that sits behind it, that they have access to reuse, to redeploy, to think up new and creative ways to do stuff. And, and that's a really powerful tool in terms of moving us through this sort of thing from, are they finding us? Are they discovering and having access to us? And are they able to reuse us in really interesting ways? And that's beyond sort of the CATS app that is very popular on DPLA, but what are the other ways in which people might want to reuse us and reuse our collections and repurpose it? And that falls back on a lot of the trigger events that DPLA has done to begin with, many years ago, which is to make us think about how we open up our collection in new and interesting ways. And with that, I'm going to pass it over to Tara next, who's going to talk about how this Google Analytics and the dashboard can drive sort of grant writing and grant funding.
Thank you, Jason. Hi, everyone. I'm going to cover how analytics can really be useful for both proposing or developing your idea for a grant, as well as once you have that grant, how it can be useful, specifically DPLA analytics, that is. So just to give you a little bit of background about myself, I have, working as part of a team in digital collections, received all of the grants on this slide, National Endowment Institute, Mellon, and so forth, and state and local grants as well. And so therefore have applied and received those grants, as well as been a reviewer specifically for NEH. And so have a good insight into what goes into applying for that grant, proposing that grant, as well as being at the other end and kind of judging the quality and the effectiveness of, say, the grants. And one thing that's really important, certainly informing your idea for proposal, is exactly what Jason was covering earlier, and that is having a keen understanding of your collections. If it's, we'll assume it's about digital collections in some way or manner, whether it's creating them, digitizing them, contextualizing them, or in some way that grant that you're proposing, you're thinking of proposing, covers those areas. And where analytics can be so helpful is if you already have existing digital collections and you're identifying areas that you want to expand, you're working with faculty, you're working with researchers, community, and you're thinking about those questions, those research questions for your proposal and how you're going to craft the proposal, having the quantifiable data, the analytics, and being able to make your case is very, very important. Because it shows that you've done the proper homework and the proper preparation to really state your case and make your case for the grant funding. Another way in the proposal is often, increasingly, proposals, grant funding agencies and grant funding and foundations will be asking what will be your outcome. What are the measurable outcomes? How will you be disseminating this research or this project? So being able to kind of have a solid plan, and that is, we have a plan of, we will follow these analytics. So these are our numbers now, and we hope to achieve these numbers, and we're going to be tracking them. Or we will be using DPLA, which has a national, international reach. Not only is it going to be our, kind of our local digital collection, but we'll also be disseminating it through, we are a member of DPLA, we are contributing institutions. So there's another way of using that. And then we'll also be tracking usage through our, the DPLA Analytics. And these are legitimate, authoritative ways of stating, of making your case and how you're going to provide kind of measurable outcomes and impact. Obviously, it's also, there's the other piece, the qualitative, the anecdotal, but this is one quantifiable way that's a really good case for that. And then the second, implementing and reports, that's where, it's more obvious, the analytics, being able to track that usage and to make those reports to to demonstrate if there is a change, and we're able to see that this was what formerly hidden is now really kind of come to the surface, and we're able to prove that and show that, demonstrate that through these analytics, and in a more granular manner. Before, in the projects that I had worked on, it was really a guessing game. We didn't have good analytics, and it was difficult to kind of drill down, as Jason mentioned, to really kind of find those precise areas that were engaging, or that were being used. And so this is yet another way to communicate that in your reports, and also to stakeholders, so in a quantifiable way. So these are kind of primary early stages, even before you're thinking of what your grant will look like in the proposal, as Jason said, identifying maybe weak areas and so forth. And then later on, when you're implementing your grant, being able to document and provide regular reports in terms of your dissemination, your outreach plan. So that's it for me. I'm going to hand it over to Bobby and Hammond.
Hello. So these are just some basic resources and tutorials that you might want to look at if you want to improve your knowledge of Google Analytics generally. When I first got out of library school, my first job was as a web resources librarian, and I was happy to forget most of what I knew about MARC records, but I had to get up to speed pretty quickly on Google Analytics. And there's lots of information online about Google Analytics. Much of it is of fairly low quality, and a lot of it's fairly dated. But these are some of the more useful ones that I found, just as a way to get started. And then at the bottom, you'll see, if you want more information about the analytics, the DPLA Analytics Dashboard, there's a blog post and a video tutorial that Audrey put together in 2018 that is still online and is still useful for understanding that. And if you have any questions about Google Analytics, you can contact me. My contact information is in the slide presentation as well. And that's it. Back to Kelly then.
Yeah. So we would like to hear from you guys if you have any questions. We have all of our contact information if there's a specific person you'd like to get in touch with. I don't see anything in the Q&A at this time, but we will still give people a moment if they have anything they want to share with us. All right, I am not seeing anything. I'm going to stop. Does anybody want me to go back though and keep this up for a second? But I'm not seeing any questions, in which case, I guess we are done for today. Thank you guys so much, for everybody on the Assessment Working Group team for taking part in this.
And I'll close us out with some more information about upcoming events for DPLA. But first, I want to thank the Assessment Working Group for your work on this webinar and the survey and your work over the past year to visualize DPLA's impact and explore how contributors can better draw users to visit, use, and reuse our DPLA materials. So thank you to our speakers, to Kelly, to Tara, Jason, Audrey, and Bobby, thank you all for joining us this afternoon. If you're interested in learning more about discoverability, join us for inaugural virtual brown bag on putting Wikimedia to work for your institution. That will be Thursday, October 8th from 1 to 1:45 Eastern Time, and it'll be hosted by DPLA's own data fellow, Dominic Burt-McDevitt, and John DeWeese, Supervisor of Digitization Services for the Toledo Lucas County Public Library. And just as a teaser, by popular demand, we're kicking off our virtual brown bag series, and these will be 45-minute virtual get-togethers organized around topics of interest or importance to our network. And this first one with Dominic and John will be the few short months of work that Toledo, Lucas County Public Libraries collections are now generating, and they're generating over 500,000 page views per month on Wikipedia. John will talk and walk us through exactly how he's used Wikimedia to grow usage, and Dominic will give us an update on the other exciting progress being made on our Wikimedia project. I'll put the invitation to that first one in the chat. Oh, okay, DPLA is already doing that. Thank you. And the second brown bag, which you all should also mark your calendars for, is going to be on Thursday, November 12th from 1 to 1:45 Eastern time again. And you all are invited to join Michael Delabita and the DPLA tech team to explore the theme of use and discoverability. They'll talk through how SEO, the Google algorithm, the DPLA API, usage and design, right statements, metadata, collection development, social media, and much more play a part in discoverability. Thank you again for joining us, and thank you to the Assessment Working Group. Have a great afternoon.